Adrian, thank you. Joining us live tonight is Roe Kaufman, a senior associate at the Keystone Law Group in California. Appreciate your time tonight. This has the world's attention.
It certainly does, Marnie. Thank you for having me.
So today, Britney told the court, as Adrian just expressed, she is being forced to take birth control. She cannot get married. And she said, quote, "All I want is to own my own money and for this to end and for my boyfriend to be able to drive me in his car." So from a legal standpoint, explain to us how a conservatorship like this works and why Britney Spears, who is 39 years old, does not have control of her own life.
Sure. Well, maybe the good starting point is what is a conservatorship? A conservatorship in California is a court proceeding where a judge essentially appoints a responsible person or an organization known as a conservator to care for another adult, known as the conservatee, in this case, Britney Spears, who cannot care for themselves or manage their finances. We've got two different aspects in California: a conservator of the person, where the conservator is tasked with managing the personal needs of the conservatee, like medical care, making sure they have appropriate food, clothing, shelter, and a conservator of the estate who manages the finances of the conservatee when they're not able to do so. So the conservators have very broad authority and essentially steps into the shoes of the conservatee and makes all aspects of the conservatee's personal needs and finances. They have the right to control all of that. At some point along the way, there must have been an expert medical opinion introduced into evidence into court that was of the opinion that Britney was, for some reason, not able to handle these things on her own.
So what factors will the judge be considering now to make a decision of whether or not to free her from this conservatorship or make some sort of change that she would want?
Well, that's a great question. You heard, obviously, some of the reports of the things she was saying today in court. Very passionate testimony, it seems. The court is obviously concerned with her personal thoughts, opinions on her condition and the conservatorship moving forward. But that is just one factor the court's going to consider here. So much of this is going to be driven by the expert medical opinion of her doctors, her care team, and whether they really believe that her mental competency issues, to the extent she's suffering from any kind of mental illness, that is not impacting her ability to manage her person or her finances moving forward. If they still believe that her mental condition renders her unable to make those decisions, there's a strong possibility that a conservatorship could stay in place.
So what type of evaluation has to happen, and how long will that take?
Well, they can be done very quickly. Typically it involves a cognitive evaluation by a board-certified neurologist or someone of competent experience. They look at their ability to exercise independent judgment, their ability to make decisions essentially on their own. And so that is not something that necessarily has to be time consuming, but it has to be something she's willing to do. And as the court has indicated today, they are looking for her to affirmatively petition to terminate the conservatorship. So that's a step that she's going to need to take with her counsel in order to move that ball forward.
Her dad is one of two people with equal power over her finances. Some estimate up to $50 million. Can he do what he sees fit with that money, or does he just guard over it until a final decision is made?
Well, that's one of the primary points of a conservatorship. Is the conservatorship not only appoints a third party to take care of the finances for someone who's not capable of doing so on their own, but it provides court oversight. So the answer to your question is very simply no. Jamie Spears cannot act with impunity here and spend money as he sees fit. He is subject to requirements of accountings. He needs to account to the court and to the interested parties. He's subject to fiduciary obligations. So he is, in a sense, a money manager. At this point, they also have Bessemer Trust, who's been appointed as the co-conservator of the estate. So there's an additional level of oversight there. They need to work together with Mr. Spears. They have to be synchronous in their decisions in order to make decisions on Britney's behalf.
Real quick, in your legal opinion, her testifying today, did that help or hurt her case and what she wants?
Well, if her goal is truly to terminate the conservatorship, I think it can only help her. The judge is clearly interested in what she has to say. But again, Britney's thoughts, impressions, opinions, desires are only one part of the equation. So much of this is going to be driven by the expert medical opinions of her doctors and her care team, who will really be the driving force behind determining whether this is going to stay in place or not. As to Jamie, whether he's going to stay in place as a co-conservator of the estate, that's really going to turn on whether there's any evidence of impropriety on his part, whether he's mismanaged assets, things of that nature.
Such a complicated case playing out on the world stage and very personal matters in the public eye. Roe Kaufman, we appreciate your time and your observations tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much.